Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Heather, and on this channel we like to walk a very fine line between a shopping addicted makeup monster and a responsible adult with a makeup hobby. Now, I really enjoy eyeshadow singles, dual-chromes, multi-chromes, blush, highlight, lip gloss, basically everything except pressed glitter. And today we're going to be ranking all the palettes that I used this year. There are 117 of them. I am sure I'm going to lose count at some point. Everything will fall to shambles, so hopefully bear with me, okay? If that sounds like something you're interested in, stick with me. We're getting into it right now. So coming in at number 117 is what I like to call the Melt Cat Litter palette. Now, I put down at the very bottom all of the palettes that really upset me for one reason or another. Bad quality, didn't work for me, bad texture, whatever. This palette, when I tried to use it, it really just demolished my eyelids. Like, it felt like I was rubbing rocks on my eyes. It hurt, and I had to take it off, and then I was like very sensitive to everything else I put on the rest of the day. It was this shade in particular right here, Sweet Lucy. So I have not tried this palette since. I literally got my money back from customer service at Sephora, and I was like writing this palette off. I would at some point like to try some of the mattes because I think I might actually like the mattes, but the shimmers, the metallic like grittiness of them in this formula was so bad. I don't even want to touch this. All right. Next up, and this will be no surprise to anybody, is the Midas Cosmetics Lemonade palette. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that I have talked about the fact that the colors in this palette fall out. I have glued 6 of them back in, and just in the process of getting this palette out, going through and organizing it, putting it into a ranking at some point, we've got 2 more shades falling out. Like, this pisses me off. I don't care if it's a clearance palette. It should still be worth using. It should still be good quality. So if your palette is so old and dusty that it's no longer like good, like it's expired, don't sell it to me. I don't care how cheap it is. That's bad business. So for me, that pissed me off. And so it came in at 116. Coming in at 115 would be the other Midas Cosmetics palette I have, and this is the Artistry something or other. Artistry palette volume 2. And again, this one was like okay quality, but then I lost another shade. Like, I ordered these at the same time. Hold please while I get the shade. I ordered these at the same time when they were basically begging people to shop from their website so they could save their business. And yet they're giving me crappy products. Like, what makes me want to buy other products then? I don't know. So, coming in at 115 was this palette. Coming in at 114 is the ColourPop Apricot Me Not palette. And this palette is coming in so low because it is so boring and light. Like, even this shade, which looks dark, is actually not that dark. And all of the metallics look the same. Like, on the lid, these all look the same. You can get one look out of this, which is any of these light mattes in the crease, this slightly below the crease, one of these on the lid, and it's all gonna look the same. It doesn't matter what you use. And they're all just like a hint of color. It's like the La Croix of eyeshadow palettes. So it had to come in very low. That's 114. 113 then is this one, which is the Wet n Wild Care Bears palette. And the reason this came in so low is not because of quality, but because they put so many damn pressed glitters in here. There's 3 pressed glitters in here, which just irritates me because I could have used, like, you could have given me other colors. You could have given me like boring other colors. I wouldn't have cared. At least it wasn't pressed glitters. But a third, like 3 out of the 15 shades, a fifth, 20% of this palette is stuff I can't even put on my eyes. So I tend to not grab for it because I know there's so much in there that I can't use, and then it just fell lower because of that reason. All right, 113, God, I hope it's 113. I may have already screwed up the numbers. Bear with me, you guys. Is this Fantasy Makers. This is the Hallow Queen palette from Wet n Wild, their Halloween release. And you can see it is a very, very soft formula. It slid off of a stack of about 8 more palettes here, and it, like, there's just dust everywhere from, I think, this shade. Regardless, the shades are fine. I definitely feel like they're all very like satin, like they look metallic, they look duochrome. When you put them on the lid, they look very satin. So for me, it just, I love the color story, and if somebody else did this color story, I'd probably be hype as heck for it, but this just, the quality just wasn't there. Coming in at number 113 is the Juvia's Place Culture palette, which looks like this. And the reason why it came in so low, number one, it's an enormous palette. Like, physically, it's a large palette, which I'm not a huge fan of. And then it does have one pressed glitter, which I can kind of let slide. But so much of this is like you can make monochromatic looks. Like I have a hard time blending the different rows of looks together because I feel like it either gets very muddy or it all just looks the same. Like you can blend these kind of shades with these kind of shades, but then they just all look brown. You know what I mean? Like it's just not that special. And then you have these like special duochrome shades, but they hard pan really easily and then you just don't get a whole lot out of them. Like I just wish it was more. So for me, like I love the concept, I love the idea of it, but for some reason it just doesn't work. And the weird thing is when I swatched this in store, these metallic shades were like over the moon, like super metallic shades. And now when I get them home, they just hard pan. So I don't know if I have a dud or if there's something about like 1,000 people putting their grubby fingers into an eyeshadow palette that actually makes them work. 110 is the A.O. Coralie. This is the original Beauty Bay and A.O. Coralie palette. And I loved, like the packaging on this was like 10 out of 10. Like if I rated just on packaging, it'd be towards the top. But the actual palette itself, number one, super bulky for what it is. And number two, the shades just don't go together as well as I would have liked. Like these are neon, these are allegedly neon, and then these are all supposed to be the pastel shades. And then you've got 4 metallics here. So like I get what they were trying to do, but unless you're going to do like a gradient rainbow kind of eye look, it just doesn't work very well. So for me, it fell lower because the way that I do my makeup, this isn't very useful. Next up is the Thor palette from the Thor Love and Thunder movie. And I think had I actually gone to watch the movie first, I don't even know if I would have bought these palettes, but this is the palette color story. It does magnetize together, which I think is pretty cool. That's one of the things that saves it from being all the way at the bottom. But the actual color story itself, the formula from Ulta Beauty is just very okay. So this side is a very super predictable color story, nothing super special. This is a more interesting color story, which is why I picked it up. But everything is just very mid-tone, very soft, very satin. There's nothing super bright and sparkly and interesting about this palette. So when I use it, I have to go into other stuff. I will likely end up keeping this through declutters because I think the concept of it is super cool, but it definitely was not worth the money. Next up is the Too Faced Gingerbread Spice palette, and this one I liked a lot. I wasn't sure if I was going to keep it or not, so I wanted to use it again this year to decide if I needed to let it go or to keep it. And I really liked the look that I put together with this shade Gumdrop and then this deeper shade. I like this olivey green shade, and then I like the lighter mattes that you have to kind of blend everything out. It kind of gave me a similar look to what I have on now, but that's a completely different palette. I do like this. Do I necessarily need to keep it? Probably not. It does still smell really good, like vanilla-y almost. I guess it's supposed to smell like gingerbread. I don't know. It smells vanilla to me. But yeah, it fell lower because so many neutrals. I just don't need that many neutrals in my palettes. So coming in next is the Huda Wild Chameleon palette, and this is the one that looks like this. Now I picked this one up because I wanted to complete my trio with the kind of green blue palette and then the Jaguar palette. This one wasn't as special to me as the other ones, so it did rank a little bit lower because of that. But I do think it's a pretty palette. It's a nice formula, but again, lots of warm tones that I don't necessarily wear all of the time. Next is the Hauntingly Glamorous palette from Alien Cosmetics or Unearthly Cosmetics. And the reason this one went a little bit lower is I just felt like the formula was a bit dry. Like I picked this up on sale because I heard it was a dupe for the Melt Muerte palette, which I had not been able to get my hands on. And it's nice, but this isn't how I do my makeup. This is a lot of darks, which is great, and I think it would make a great companion palette to other palettes that are very light and mid-tone, but it doesn't, like these light shades are not sufficient to go with these and these two shimmers. So I just get kind of lost with this one, and the fact that it's a drier formula makes me not want to even go into it. So it fell lower because of that. The artwork honestly is part of what saved it from getting all the way to the bottom. And then last for this pile, and this one hurts, is the Martine Cosmetics 669 palette, and it's in its own little like case thing, and it looks like this. Now I love the color story, like the vibe of this gets me. I am 100% for it. The only trouble is that the multi-chrome shades that are in here, which are these three, are very soft. They're very thin formulas. So they just don't give you like the punch that you need or want. And like I dig into them, right? And like you can kind of see this one, but like when I look at it, I see nothing. So it's a very soft formula. I wish it had a little bit more pigment to it because I think that would make it super, super special. What I love about this palette are these metallic black and gunmetal type shades. The deep dark blacks I think were a bit redundant, and I do like these kind of olivey shades. So in general, I think it's a good palette. I just don't think it's worth the price, and I think there are better multi-chromes out on the market. So if you're interested in the multi-chromes, go buy a single from an indie brand. You're going to be much happier than with this palette. Oh, by the end of today, we're going to have swatches all over my leg because I am wearing shorts right now, and I don't know where any of my like swatch towels are. So we're just wiping everything on my leg. That bodes well. All right, next pile. ColourPop Lush Life palette, and I picked this one up for $5. It was on clearance on the ColourPop's website, and I picked it up because everybody was like going on and on about how remarkable this palette was, and I was like, well, if it's that remarkable, I'm gonna need to try it. And it's okay. I think this quad here is what I find super interesting about it, and everything else is very forgettable warm tones. So I think if I were to keep this palette, what I would do is kind of pop all these warm tones out and then fill it with something else just to make it a little bit more interesting, because these are nice, but I just feel like everything else is really irrelevant, at least for me. Is the ColourPop and Powerpuff Girls palette, and I got this one originally to change out with the Nightmare Before Christmas palette, and then once I got them, discovered that this is a different pan size. My bad. So had I known that from the beginning, I never would have even purchased this palette. It is okay. I do like the bright colors here, but again, you've got two pressed glitters, which I don't like. You've got a ton of neutrals, which I don't care for, and everything else is just like, it's okay. So for me, the packaging doesn't do it for me, the collab doesn't do it for me, and it's the wrong size for what I wanted to use it for, so that's why it fell so low. Next up is the BFF palette from BH Cosmetics, and I went on a kick at Marshall's and TJ Maxx when all of the BH palettes hit those two stores, because these palettes were so cheap. Like this was originally I think almost $30, and I found it for $9. So awesome. The trouble is there's only a handful of shades I like. This one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and that one. These are okay. These other shades here are okay. And then you've got a bunch of neutrals that I don't care about. So if I could condense this palette down, I think I'd be much happier. Like popping some of these out and putting them in this Lush Life palette would maybe even be pretty cool. I don't know if they would actually work to do that, but it's too much neutrals for how little pops of color it is, which is why it fell so low. Next is the ColourPop of Quartz palette, and this palette, again, it's these cool tone neutrals which I'm really drawn to, but for some reason this palette is not as special as some of the other cool tone palettes I've come across, so it falls lower because of that. The textures just aren't there. It's not like super interesting and dynamic shades. It's just like light gray, mid-tone gray, dark gray, black. So I don't know, like I just don't get wowed and excited when I see this palette, which is really unfortunate because I thought this was going to be like a slam dunk palette, but it just gets kind of boring. Next up is the, oh my god, I almost just lost an entire pile of palettes, you guys, is the Saga of Freya palette from Odin's Eye. And I don't know what possessed me to buy this palette, to be perfectly honest. I was seeing a couple of eye looks online that I was like, wow, that's really pretty. It's a cool combination of like the greens and the oranges, and it was this palette. And I was like, okay. And then I saw these two shades getting swatched out a lot that are just these really soft, like mint and like a silvery taupe shade. And I just thought, wow, those are so pretty. I need to have that palette. So I just talked myself into it over time until I was like hyped up enough to buy it. And then I used it for like one look. And then I was like, I don't like how green and orange looks together on me. And I haven't used it since. So I'm really kind of disappointed in myself for doing that. At least I got it on sale. But at the same time, like it falls so low because I just don't use it that much. It's a phenomenal quality though. So if you like this color story, you will love this palette. It's just not the color story for me. but I think the packaging is pretty and the quality is great. Next up is the ColourPop in the Limelight palette, and it looks like this. This palette was just very okay. Again, it suffers from this problem that ColourPop has where they make these very like light to mid-tone palettes, so every eye look kind of comes out the same. Even this shade down here is not terribly dark. It looks dark in the pan, but it shears out very easily on your lids. And so I just don't love it because it just doesn't give me what I want. Like, I'm expecting like neons and I'm not getting neons, so it just kind of disappointed. Next up, this is the ColourPop and Target Truly Iconic palette, and it's one of these like cute little 9 pans. I think this is a great little color story. I don't find myself reaching for it as much as I thought I would, but I do really like this shade because it's like a blue toned silver, and then this one is a really nice like kind of lavender taupe shade. I think they're really pretty finishes. So if you're looking for something cheap, you're in a Target, whatever, definitely pick this one up. But compared to some of the other things that I have in my collection, I just feel like I would reach for them more. All right, and then Cherry Crush from ColourPop. So this one, again, it's very monochromatic. This one actually does have some deep tones, which is awesome. It has this one shade right here, but whether you do this like more burgundy row, the red row, or the pink row, it all just kind of pulls pink on your lids. So it's like there almost, but not quite. The metallics in here are really nice though, and the reason that I ended up getting this palette is because I wanted the little mirror that they sold with it. This is the Odin's Eye mirror. I don't know where the cherry mirror is at the moment. It might be in a travel bag. Yeah, I think it's in my travel bag, but that's what I wanted it for, was the travel mirror. And the mirror plus the palette was actually on sale more at ColourPop than the mirror by itself, so I bought them both together. That's how I ended up with this palette. And it's nice, but it's not like, you know, sending me over the moon. Next up was a palette I had no reason to purchase, and that is the Melt Amor y Mariposas palette. And I picked it up because it went on like a super clearance on their website, and I was like, you know what, it has a bunch of really beautiful deep mattes, it's got some really nice greens, it's got a couple of purples, like a true purple in here. I went for it, and it's not a bad palette, but it's just, again, it's not a color story that I turn to all the time. And so I end up just not using it. Like, it's big, it's bulky, and it's just not my color story typically, so I just don't turn to it. And that's why this one fell so low. The quality is good though. The quality of the shades is good. Next up is the Nomad Haunted Europe palette, and this one hurts. It took me forever to actually open this palette up and start using it, and it pretty much looks like I haven't used it at all. It's because I've used it a handful of times, and every time I do something with it, I'm like, yeah, okay. And like, I kind of like it, but it's not quite there for me. I don't know what it is about this palette. I really dislike these two rows, so I think if it had been this, I'd have been even more intrigued by it. But I don't know. Every time I look at it, I'm like, yeah, I'll just use this other thing, and I don't go into it. So I have it. I love that I have it for collector's purposes, and I like the embossing, the artwork, and everything, but in terms of utility, it fell so low because I just don't ever use it. This is the same problem with these two palettes, which is On a Whimsy and Ticket to Dreamland. I put Ticket to Dreamland a little bit lower because I literally purchased this just for the packaging. My thought was to rip all the shades out of here and then put other singles in it, and I just haven't done that yet. The shades in and of themselves are pretty, and the more that I like individually swatched them while I was trying to do this ranking, the more I was like, wow, maybe I need to use this palette. But when I go into this palette and I look at it and say like, okay, what's the look I can make out of this? My brain is like, I don't know what you're supposed to do with this palette. Like, just power down. And I just get kind of frustrated. Like, all of these colors individually are pretty, but they just don't go together. And then of course you have a pressed glitter here, so that's like, no thanks. On a Whimsy is a little bit better because the shades do go together. It's definitely more soft. It almost gives me like bridal vibes, but this kind of shade I feel like was a bit unnecessary for this one. And I think of the two of them, I like this one a little bit better, which is why it's like one above. But again, everything's very soft, everything's very light. You have this kind of deep gray shade, which is nice, but everything is like light to mid-tone before that. So you kind of get stuck making the same pattern for your eye look every time. Cute packaging though. Very cute packaging. All right. Aether Beauty. This one frustrates me. Ugh, not just opening it, but the fact that the names are on the stupid paper. I hate that. And then the actual color story. This looks so vibrant. And when you swatch it, it looks so vibrant. And then you put it on your eyes and it's like, where did the color go? I don't know what it is about these shades, but they all just pull satin. Everything looks soft. And I think that's part of the like aesthetic of Aether Beauty, which is I think part of why I don't like it. The color story screams Heather, but the actual like application and product quality definitely doesn't. So this one fell lower because of that. This palette suffers the same issue. This is the Huda Beauty Purple Haze palette, and I love the color story of this. Like all these like really solid purples I vibe with. I picked this up on clearance for $5 from their Black Friday sale, so I'm not mad about the price that I paid for it. It's all very soft. I think these were almost meant to be like grunge pastels in the way that they were built or designed, because everything is just very light. Like even this shade looks super dark in the pan and it comes off as like nothing. So I think that's what they were going for. I think they would have done better by trying to like actually tell people that, so they would have understood it better. The shimmers are nice, but again, it falls lower because it's just not a complete palette for me. Next up is the Hummingbird palette. Now this palette also, this is the Odin's Eye and who is this? Tina the Fancy Face collabs. And I do really like the individual colors that they picked. The multi-chrome is pretty, which is this shade right here. I think the individual colors are pretty. I just struggled to put these colors together into a palette, into a cohesive eye look. I have a video somewhere on my channel that talks about like palettes that stump me, and this is one of the ones that I included because every time I open it, I'm like, what do I do with this? I guess I can put the Star Apple shade in the outer corner, and I guess I can blend it out with like the blue and this light blue, and then I never use like half the palette because I feel like it doesn't go. So I just get kind of lost with this palette, and I wish I didn't. Yeah, I wish I didn't get so lost with this one. Next up is the Playing in Makeup by Yolando. This is the #unexpected palette. I got a bunch of these palettes. I got one as a like a mystery palette for free, and it wasn't one of the ones that I wanted to try necessarily, so I went and ordered a couple other ones when they were half off. This one is nice. Again, it's just a super small color story, so there's not a whole lot you can do with it. I tend to do like a half cut crease type eye shape when I do my makeup, so I basically have these blended together, this in the outer corner, this on the lid, this in the inner corner. Like that's pretty much it. So it just feels a little bit one-dimensional for me, one note for me, but I think by the time I finished paying for these, they were like $8 or $9, so not the end of the world price-wise. Next up is the Garden of Juvia's palette, and this one I initially was like, I don't need this palette, and then I swatched it in Ulta, and again I fell for the trap. I don't know what it is about Juvia's palettes swatched in Ulta, but the shimmers get like magnified in their intensity in the pans at Ulta, and then when you get them home you're like, is this the same palette? I'm not sure. I do think it's very pretty, but I tend not to wear a ton of all pastel looks, so that's the only part that kind of drags this one down. I feel like I need other palettes to kind of round out the mattes, but otherwise the shimmers in here, like I bought this for the shimmers. I could care less about the mattes, but the shimmers are good. Next is the ColourPop All Amethyst palette, and I was really excited about this one. I know some people have kind of like pooped on this one a little bit, which is whatever. I do think that the range is actually really good, but I think this palette is where they started to press their shadows a little bit more hard into the pan, so they're a little bit harder to pick up. You have to dig a little bit more to get them up, and I think once you do that, the color story is actually very nice, but it's doing that digging that takes a little bit of effort. So it's pretty, but with effort. Let me get the next row of palettes. Next up is the Lorella Cosmetics Ocean Breeze palette, and I do really like this palette. I think it's a very beautiful, the packaging is super cute. It's like uncomplicated, like just uncomplicated pretty. The inside, again, super, super pretty. I love this color story. I think you make beautiful looks out of it. The metallics are definitely more of that like standard metallic formula. There's nothing special. There's no special textures here. But I feel like the colors together, you can only do so many looks with them, and then they all start to kind of look the same. So that's why it fell a little bit lower. Quality wise, it's great for what it is, but it's kind of one note. But it's a predominantly monochromatic palette. Like I would expect it to be kind of one note. Next. I have no idea where we are in the countdown. I hope editing Heather is taking care of all of that. This is the Drench Cosmetics and Neon NMUA Lunar Retrograde palette. Oh. And this is what the color story looks like. I think this is pretty. I particularly love this like quad of shades right here. This shade here is super, super sparkly, beautiful as like an inner corner or all over the lid. I love the pops of purple in here. I could have really left behind all of these kind of neutral mid-tone shades, but everything else in this palette definitely sends me, so that's why it's kind of running mid to low end of the pack. Can you guys hear my husband? He's like trying to fix stuff downstairs, and he's like, I guess if you're gonna film, go film now. So I'm like, oh, hope that doesn't all get picked up. Next is the Whale Song from Menagerie Cosmetics, and it looks like this. Now here's the trouble that I have with this palette. This shade is an iridescent blue duochrome type shade, and I don't think it matches anything else in the palette because it's a very like icy blue fuchsia shade, and I just feel like it's not quite the same undertone to go with everything else that's here. These are more like grungier green blue teals, and this just doesn't fit with it. So again, I just feel this palette kind of is not a full color story for me. I have to bring something else in to kind of round it out, and it stains like a mother trucker. So if you are not somebody who likes staining, skip Menagerie altogether. Next up is the Sigma Cinderella palette. This is the first Sigma palette that really struck my interest, and it looks like this because it had these really beautiful like deeper tones here, and then these beautiful sparkly shades to go with it. You had a black. There wasn't too many neutrals, so I was really into it. I used it for like a week or two, and then I just was kind of like bored by it. So I think it gets me excited, but then it doesn't keep me excited. So I haven't bought anything from Sigma since because I'm just like, I don't know if it's like really worth the quality. This was like a $50 palette, and the new one that they have, the Alice in Wonderland palette, does the same thing this one did. It gets me really excited, but I don't know if it would keep me excited, and it's more expensive. So I haven't picked that one up yet. Let me know if you did and if you like it and if it keeps you going back for more. Next is the Tim Burton Nightmare Before Christmas palette, and it looks like this. Now this one, again, I do like the kind of like soft neutral gray tones that they have, and then these pops here I think are really, really nice. Where I think this palette struggles is these two shades here, because they look very beautiful in the pan, and then when you swatch them, they're just kind of like lackluster. Like this duochrome, you don't see this duochrome as it stands when you actually put it on the lid. And this one, again, it's supposed to be a duochrome like blue purple, and it just looks like a soft satin purple. So I just feel like those shades really kind of like lost it for me. I do love that there's no pressed glitters in this palette, but again, it's an incomplete color story for me. I have to go into something else to really round it out. Next is the Huda Beauty Gold palette, and I tracked this one down unused on Mercari and picked it up because I just could not stop thinking about this palette, and I do really like it. I think the color story in here is nice. Like all these toppery shades are really nice, but they are kind of one note, and I wish I would have thought about it a little bit more, but I like could not get this color story out of my head. So I did picked it up. It's as advertised, let me put it that way, and it's good quality. It's just not like as special as you might think. Next is the Clarity Cosmetics Plush palette, and it looks like this. This was part of the like wedding collection that they put out a while ago, and I really like this. I think it's a beautiful color story. I love this like champagne-y shade here, this really deep purple, and this is what I wanted that Nightmare Before Christmas color to be. Like this does something. This is like special. The other one isn't. So I wish that the ColourPop one was a little bit more like this. I like this color story a lot. It's very, very pretty, and the look that I did with this one was super pretty, but because there's only one matte in it, it is kind of one note, and you need to bring in something else unless you just want to put that matte into like the crease and buff it out till it like grays out a little bit. So that's why it fell a little lower. Gnome Chrome palette, and this is from Sugar Drizzle Polish. I picked this one up because I thought it had a really interesting mix of like some periwinkly blue shades, some olivey greens, and then it had this really pretty like silvery, almost like a blue silver kind of shade to it. It is pretty, but some of the shades in here are a little bit weak. Like this one is pretty weak, and I just don't find myself reaching into it as much as some of their other all duochrome, multichrome palettes, which you'll see a little bit later on. So this one fell lower because of that reason. Next is the Makeup Revolution and Beetlejuice palette, and this one, I have a gripe with this one. Like, you'll see it when I do my December ranking too, but this palette, the pans are just too small. Like, you can see compared to my pinky, these are tiny, tiny pans, so you can't really get your finger in there to swatch them, and your brush has to be like a pretty small brush to kind of get in, and you have to kind of like rub back and forth a little bit to get some pigment up. I think the actual color story is very pretty. Like, I like this kind of like pastel grungy type look, but I just think if they'd have made the pans a little bit bigger, it would be more usable. Next up is the Control Alt Glam palette from ColourPop. I saw somebody else's video saying that they were not a huge fan of this creator, and I don't know if that was like a personal thing or if there was some drama there. So if there is, I'm super sorry. I don't know anything about it. But I thought this color story was pretty. I was drawn to kind of the purpley shades and this pop of blue. It does kind of remind me of All Amethyst, which, since I have that right here, I'll show it to you side by side. The trouble with this palette, though, is that it is really hard pressed. So there you can see the shades together. Like, there's definitely some overlap there. This particular palette is very hard pressed, and I was just kind of disappointed with how hard pressed it was because it felt like you really had to dig to get color, and then the actual metallic shades I just felt like didn't give a lot of payoff. This again is one of those like blue to purple duochrome type shades, and I just feel like it doesn't give you that when you try to use it. It's just very soft. So I tend to use this for the mattes and then put colors from my singles collection or my multi-chrome collection in for my shimmers. Next up is the Disney Encanto palette. This is with Alamar Cosmetics, and I was really excited to get this palette even before I saw Encanto. And I talked myself out of it for a while because I was like, you don't really need it. But then it went on sale, and there was an ad through Instagram where you could get free shipping. So I ended up getting this for a really good deal, and I'm happy that I did. I think it's a beautiful color story. I really like these two kind of swampy and teal greens here. And then the metallics on the top row are very pretty. There's no special textures in here, which is kind of disappointing. I think that would have taken this palette to the next level. But I think they did a good job representing the colors without just being like, this is one character, this is the next character, this is the next character. So I think they did a good job picking colors. If you cannot get your hands on that, though, you may want to consider this palette if you can find it at Marshall's, which I did for less than $8. And it is the, what is this? The Cara Beauty Behind the Mask palette. And it looks like this. Now, I think some of these pinky shades, these greens here, some of the like brown burgundies, and then like this pink here are really very, very similar to this Encanto palette. And I'll hold them up here for you. Like, I think there is some similarity there, which I can kind of appreciate. The textures in here, though, there are some really special textures. Like the shade Feathers here has a really beautiful, like glittery finish to it without being actual PET plastic glitter. So I really like this one. I keep it. I love this one for like the concept and the art and everything, but I love this one even more for the quality, which is why it bumped up just over top of the Encanto palette in my ranking. There we go. Next up is the Melt Vita palette. So I ended up finding these unused on Mercari and got a pretty decent deal on them. And then, of course, like right after that, they did the whole, we're relaunching these palettes. And I was like, of course you are, because Murphy's Law. But regardless, I got this palette and the Muerte. The Muerte you'll see in a little while, but this one didn't make it quite as high. I feel like this color story is a little bit more predictable with like reds, orange, a pop of green, and some browns. So it fell a little bit lower, but I do think that these three browns have kind of a special undertone that I really do like. So definitely, you know, not something that I'm going to be decluttering or anything like that, especially since it was a gift from my husband, but it just didn't go as high because it's more expected of a color story. Next is the Natasha Denona Retro palette, and this one suffers from the lack of depth as well. You do have two kind of deeper shades here and here. This one though is a metallic. This is your only matte that's like deep. So then if you want to deepen anything else up in this palette, you can't. There's no deepening shade that is brown or pink, like red, or even a black to kind of round this out, or a really dark gray would have been perfect to kind of round this out. I do feel like there's some redundancy, like these two are super similar, these two are super similar, these two are super similar. You probably didn't need all three of those. I see where she was going with it, and I do like it. I'm just not in love with it. Next up is the Ace Beauté Tropical Vibes palette, and this is their reformulated palettes. I tried this one first because I was like, if I like this one, I'm going to go back and rebuy some of the other color stories in the better formula. And I did really like this. These shades kind of remind me of like the Glam Light formula in how like buttery and smooth they are. And the mattes are really blendable. It looks like I haven't even touched this palette, but they blend so nicely and they're very pigmented. So you just pop your brush in there and you're ready to go. I do like these kind of olivey khaki tones here in the middle. I'm not so much for this shade in this particular color story, but I think this is really pretty. Hopefully I'll be able to use it a little bit more in the coming year because I want to try to focus on what I have. But yeah, definitely I liked it a lot. Next up is ColourPop on Cloud Blue. And I picked this one up later because, again, pressed glitter here in the center, not a huge fan. But I did like the fact that this was a different, this is more like denim-y blues rather than like a pure, like a royal blue, if you will. So I liked the idea of this one. Ultimately, I ended up finding another palette in ColourPop's collection that kind of represented this as well. So I don't use this one as much, but I do think it's a pretty color story. I like the metallics that they have in here. And the glitter is like super teeny tiny fine, so I don't know if it's considered eye safe or not. It is marked on the back as like not eye safe, but the ones in their newer palettes are the same size and they're marked as eye safe. So I don't know what's going on there. Then I have ColourPop Lock It Down, and this one is just a purple color story. This was part of the Christmas launch last year. One of the Christmas launches. I think this was the Ulta exclusive Christmas launch, and it's cute, but it's nothing special. Like, it's decent quality, it's just not special, so it fell lower because of that. And then I have ColourPop by the Rosé. First of all, I love the like wine theme for this, and second of all, I like the actual color story. Now, these two shades I do think are a bit similar, and they don't go quite as deep as I wanted. If this was like a step or two deeper, I think I would have been even happier with this color story. But I do think the metallics are pretty. They're super redundant, but I do think they're pretty, so it came up a little higher because of that. Now, if you happen across this palette at TJ Maxx or Marshalls or wherever you find that kind of stuff, I would definitely get it. Oh my god, if I can get it out of the palette thing. Here we go. This is the Cara Beauty Blur the Lines palette, and it's one of 3 palettes in this collection, but it looks like this. It's a really, really beautiful color story, right? Very predicted, very expected, not special, but it's very well done. And I think if you're going to do a palette where you're going to have a very expected color story, it needs to be well done. I like the art, this kind of like stylist magazine type vibe is cute, and then the actual quality of the shades is really nice. This one is like super sparkly, which I love. I like that you have this pop of red and pop of pink that are very distinct from one another, and then you've got the burgundy, the purple, and the black here to kind of round out the look, but you can pull it in different ways. So this one I think I got for like $7 or $8. Definitely worth the price. Although the sleeves drive me crazy. They need to be like a hair bigger. All right, next up is the Heather Austin palette. This is the only Adept Cosmetics palette that I own, and I've heard some things about how she has treated like customers that I was not a huge fan of. Not Heather, but the brand Adept. So I'm not sure if I'll be buying anything else from them, but I did want to try this one out. The thing that doesn't do it for me though is the mattes. Like these mattes, I don't feel like they go with the rest of the shimmers. So I would have been fine if she had kept like 2 of these mattes, but then put in something else for the shimmers, because all of these are very like pinky toned, and then this one is like gold and silver, and it just doesn't really go with these colors. So I get kind of lost with this one. It's a decent quality, but I think like Sugar Drizzle, Divina, Terra Moon, they have better formulas for those like special shades that don't crease as much. This one kind of creases on me, even with a glitter glue. Next up is the Gourmand Girls Time of Year palette, and I like this part of this palette, obviously. I love the like periwinkle, blue, pink, purple kind of a look, but these shades, they look super pretty in the pan, and when you try to put them on the eyes, sometimes they just fall a little bit short. So I don't know if they're like hard panning that I need to like take some off, but I just wish they had a little bit more oomph to them. I've resisted buying anything else from the brand because I just feel like I wanted them to be better quality than what they are for this particular palette. I don't know if the newer palettes have a different quality. If you've tried them though, definitely let us know in a comment, because some of the color stories are really pretty. It's just, I don't know about the quality. Then we have the original ColourPop Hocus Pocus palette, and it looks like this. Now truly, the things that get me interested are like these 6 shades right here. These shades that really definitely represent the 3 girls. I do like this Goodbye Cruel World, and I call it a bus. It works really nicely to like deepen everything up. Of course, all that sparkle just dissipates into nothing when you put it on the lid. And again, we have another pressed glitter. So if this didn't have a pressed glitter in it, I think I'd reach for it more. I get where they were going with all the neutrals, so I can tolerate them in this palette. But the other ColourPop palette definitely went higher because it's not as neutral. I have so many palettes that are not flat palettes, and it's so frustrating to try to stack things up on top of them. So the next one up is this Sugar Pill palette. Woo! I think this is the volume 3. This was like the Halloween release, and I really like the shimmers in here. I think they are a really pretty formula. I do feel like these are a little bit too similar. The blush color is super pretty, and I love the design of the packaging. So it kind of falls middle of the road because there are things I like about it, things that are kind of like, okay. But yeah, it's definitely a decent palette. Next is the Melt Millennial Pinks palette. I went on like a melt spree for a while and was picking up a bunch of their palettes, and everybody was kind of like pooping all over this one, but I was like, it's pink, I have to try it. And it's nice. I definitely think it has a better gradient than some of the other pink palettes. Like you definitely get like lighter to deeper. And then the fact that you have this like gray and black here, they're almost like a blue gray and a like navy black that I think do round the palette out really well. I have some trouble blending this silver in with the rest of everything else because I'm not sure how well they go together, but I do think it's a pretty color story. It's interesting. It makes me think a little bit. Next is the Glamlight Icy palette, and this palette got demolished by my kids, let me tell you. They like jammed their fingers into a bunch of these. Love that for me. But the actual palette itself is really nice. The color story, I think there's a little bit too much similarity. Like, I don't know that it necessarily needed to be this big of a palette, but I do think the actual quality of the palette is very nice. So it ranks kind of in the middle for that reason. This like collab person, like the icy thing, I don't really care about that at all, honestly. So that part didn't intrigue me in the least. Next up is the Teresa is Lethal palette, and this one is one of those color stories that kind of challenges me a little bit more than what I'd like. This kind of pink to blue duochrome is kind of so-so for me, and the Hive Mind shade is kind of so-so for me. This silver really saves the day though, because it's a really, really nice sparkly silver. Everything else in the palette matte-wise is fine, but it doesn't like impress me as much as I thought it was going to, so it kind of came middle of the road because of that reason. Next is the Pat McGrath and Bridgerton palette, and this is the original 6-pan. I got this because I wanted to try her special shades, and this was one of the times where I felt like there was something that I would use that had a special shade in it, so I went ahead and picked this one up. It's fine. The special shade though, the trouble with the special shades is that they're baked a little dry, and so you get this very like shimmery glittery type topper finish to it. It's not like a full-on opaque type shade, and I wasn't sure I was expecting that, so it kind of fell lower because of that. And then I have some of these little small palettes that I have from Unique Beauty. This is the Pamper Me palette, and it looks like this. Now, I will say this shade here and these two shades are like stupid pretty. They're that wet duochrome formula that you see a lot of brands coming out with right now, but this shade is not nearly as dark as it looks in the pan, and these two shades are very light. They almost disappear on my skin tone, and I'm a ghost. So for me, it makes some of the palette unusable, and then I have to kind of go into other things to round that out. So it kind of is disappointing from that perspective, but the duochromes are what save it and bring it up as high as it is. Same thing with this one. This is the volume 1, I think from their Japan series, I want to say, and it looks like this. This metallic red is one of the prettiest metallic reds I have ever seen, and it's like full on metal. I do really like this shade as well. Again, the pinks, the peach, and the red in here as mattes are just a little bit thin, so I don't find myself reaching into them for that, which is why they fall a little bit lower. Here's the next one, which is the A.O. Corley. This is half of the second Beauty Bay collection she did. I like this format better. It's like pocket sized, right? And I don't really care for this Rev shade? Rev? I'm not sure. Everything else in here though is beautiful. And this like light blue sparkly shade, oh, it's the tits. So definitely I like that one. The other half of that palette is coming up way later. The Nomad, I don't even know what language that is. This is the Paradise Islands palette, but it looks like this. And again, super, super pretty. This is like cocktails on the beach kind of a palette. The only trouble for me is there's not a lot of depth. These two shades I don't think go deep enough for what I kind of want and hope for out of this palette, but everything else is really beautiful. So I don't find myself reaching into it as much as I want, but it's a gorgeous palette. So definitely would recommend if you're interested in that color story. Next is the Ace Beauté Oceanic palette, and this is the new format palette, and it looks like this. Now this one is interesting because these two shimmers definitely have that like glam light type shimmer formula, but then these definitely don't. So I'm not sure what they're doing with their palettes right now, but work in progress. The mattes are really pretty. They definitely are slightly different undertones from the original palettes, but I do think it's a really nice palette. It's a nice color story, so it falls down to the middle. This ColourPop Hocus Pocus palette, oh, it's so pretty. I wish I loved it more than I did, but there's a lot of neutrals. Like I know the one girl, the one witch, has like a mostly orange outfit, so I'm going to have to put up with oranges, but I just don't wear them that often, so it seems unnecessary to me. I almost wish they would have taken these two shades out and put in something else entirely, because again, you've got this like greens, purples, oranges for the three witches. Got it. I like this row of very like cool tone neutrals. Got it. But these shades and these shades were unnecessary. And then this is like a pressed glitter hybrid thing. Allegedly is eye safe. I don't know. But yeah, so there are some things that I don't love about this palette. The packaging though definitely helps it to come up, because this is like nostalgia to the max for me. All right, next up is the Nomad Bosque Nuboso de Monteverde palette, or the Monteverde Cloud Forest palette, whatever you want to call it. Some people call it the Sloth palette, or so I've seen. This is really pretty. I love the like neon pops in here. The reason why this goes lower for me is that all, with the exception of this one, all the shimmers are green. So everything that you do, you're still stuck with a green shimmer. And I just found that kind of disappointing. I wish they would have done some different colors in here. I get why they did all the greens, because there's so many different undertones of greens in a forest like this. But I kind of then feel stuck using only greens all the time. Next up is the Dragon Fruit palette from Clionadh, and when I first got this I was like, there's no way this isn't going to be in my top 10, and it's definitely not in my top 10, but I think the reason why it comes down a little bit lower is the fact that a lot of the shades are very similar. Like these shades all together just look super, super similar. You've got this nice like dark purple, you've got this really light purple, you've got two different greens, again a bit similar, and then you've got these two bare shades. it's not my palette, right? It's a collab palette, so it's somebody else's palette, but it's just not like my perfect palette. I would have liked a little bit more variety, and I do find it kind of upsetting that this Dragantini shade is very similar to one of the two highlighters that they sold with it. So it's like, I wish it wasn't. Let me show you. So that's the shade in the palette. So the shade in the palette, the shade in the single, they just look so similar. I question whether or not you needed both of them. They're pretty, don't get me wrong, but they don't both seem necessary in the same very small collection. Next is the Unique Beauty Bubble Time palette, and I like this one a lot. Again, the mattes are a bit thin, but I do like how deep this kind of olivey green is, and this shade right here is so pretty on the lid. It's definitely got this like taupey grungy olive undertone, and then like a blue to almost purple flip to it. I like that a lot. And then I like this kind of like snakeskin olivey green gold shade. Very pretty. I have the Roots palette by Unique Beauty, which looks like this, and I always keep the paper over top of it because these two shades have completely exploded. They're both like those pressed flaky type shades. The mattes in the palette, I'm not sure that they really go with the metallics because this is also like a satin metallic shade here. So you're basically stuck with like a gray, a black, and a yellow. But I love these two shades, which is what saves the palette for me. Next is what is this? This one is not labeled, but it's this one here. It's part of that same palette as the collection as the Roots palette, but it looks like this. And it's definitely that like pinky mauvey kind of color story. Kind of reminds me of the Bridgerton palette, like the Volume 1 Bridgerton palette. But this shade is way more impressive. Instead of just being like basic sparkles, it's like pink with this beautiful blue duochrome to it. I can't help but use that color every time I go into that palette. And you can see this is what I wanted the Bridgerton palette to give me, and it just doesn't. So this one went up higher because of that. And then lastly, for the Uniques, for at least a little while, is the Tokyo palette. This is the Volume 3, and it looks like this. I like this color story a lot. There's a beautiful pink in here, and then these two mattes are nice and dark, so you can really get like smoke to your look. And then these three shades are very pretty. This one is a little bit, what do I want to say, like a little softer, like the duochromeness of it is definitely more subtle. It's still there, it's just a little bit more subtle, so it's not like the perfect shade. But I have something very similar from Glam Shop as a single, so I'll sometimes pull that out instead. But the rest of this palette, super pretty. We have 2 more palettes to go, and then we are getting into like the top of the top, which I am so excited for. Next up is another one of these Cara Beauty magazine palettes, and it is this Glam Look palette. First of all, I love the representation of like not just only having white people on everything, so way to go there. But I like this color story a lot. I really don't care too much about these browns, but there's only a handful of browns in this entire palette. Everything else is pink, green, and yellow. This chiffon shade and this sequin shade are super pretty and sparkly shades. Like, I really like using those in my looks. I love that you have this deep green here, or you can use kind of this deep grayish brown taupey shade. So you have some options when it comes to rounding out your look. It's not like you're stuck with a single shade every time. The pinks in there are super pretty. So all in all, very gorgeous palette, and I got it for $7.99 at Marshall, so I can't complain about the price either. I can complain about these stupid sleeves though. They never want to go back in the sleeves. I don't even know why I keep the sleeves. The last palette in the sort of middle of the road category is the only Morphe palette I have in my ranking this year, I think. And it's this palette here, which is the 35A Up Till Dawn Artistry palette. And it looks like this. Now, again, it's kind of that like pinky green color story, but there's more browns in it than what I would like. The one nice thing is that some of them do pull very rosy. You've got a true black in here, you've got a true navy, so you do have like more options. The metallics in here are pretty. They're not like stop, you have to buy this kind of pretty, but they are really nice. For a Morphe palette, I'm actually pretty impressed with the quality. So it came to kind of the top end of this section of my ranking because of that reason. All right, let me go gather up all of the like best of the best palettes, and we're gonna go through those next. For this top echelon of my palettes, I actually then subdivided this set into kind of top, middle, bottom of the top. So we're first gonna get into kind of like the low end of my top and then work our way up, starting with one of the tiniest palettes in this whole ranking, and it's the Mystic Oak palette by Lorac. I like this palette a lot, which is very shocking. Like, I hardly am tempted to call it a palette because it's so tiny, but it's super, super pretty. The metallics in here are very metallic, very sparkly. I feel like this gives you a really poppin' look, but I almost wish it was a little bit more full than just this. Like maybe a 12-pan palette would have been nice. And I hate that the names are on this stupid paper. Like, that drives me insane. So it's not any higher because it's a neutral palette, super small, and I hate the packaging. At least that name's part of the packaging. Next is the palette I actually have on my eyes today. This is the Unearthly Cosmetics Sleepover palette, and it looks like this. I am not a huge fan of these like divots that you have to pull out, so that really takes away from like the nice quality of packaging, but this is very nicely weighted, which I really appreciate, and I love the color story. The only thing that's kind of a minus for me is this shade here, because I feel like it blends away to nothing. When I put it on my lids today, still blended away to nothing, so it fell a little bit lower because I feel like you can really only use these two shades for your crease and like above your crease. And then this shade I tend not to use at all because I just feel like it doesn't really go with everything else. So a couple of like miss shades in there, and the packaging on the outside is cute, but the inside makes me think it's like less luxe. Next is the Ace Beauté Paradise Fallen palette. Again, this is a reformulated palette that I picked up after the Tropical Paradise palette. This I think is very pretty. I love the cool tone purples in here. These do almost have like a duochrome quality to them, but it's not super intense. I'm not sure that it was meant to, but I do really like the different dark tones that you have in here, and I love that there's just a handful of neutrals. It's really not that many neutrals at all, so you can easily skip them. Next is the Thor Love and Thunder palette, and it looks like this is the Valkyrie one, so this is like the mini palette. I like this one a lot more than I like the other one, obviously, because it's much higher up in the ranking. It does kind of suffer from lack of depth because even though these shades look very dark, they're not. They sheer out a lot. Metallics in here are super pretty, but again, they're kind of soft, pull very satin, so I find myself like spicing this up with my singles rather than just like keeping the palette by itself. Next is the AO Corley. This is the other half of that Beauty Bay duo, and it looks like this. Now this one obviously I was more intrigued by because you have this really beautiful sparkly black shade right here. You have some very beautiful like greens, purples, blue, and I like the metallic that you have here. This brown metallic I could really take or leave, but everything else in this palette I really like, and the Beauty Bay formula is top notch. So that one went up a lot higher because of the better color story. This is the other blue palette that I had from ColourPop. This is the Mavericks palette, and I like this one even better than the On Cloud Blue because it does have some of those same like kind of denim-y blue shades, but then you have this really beautiful silver shade, and then this shade is kind of like a gray base with a denim blue like duochrome to it. Very, very pretty. I love the way that this palette comes together, and I feel like this is nice and bright even though in general it's kind of muted colors. That brings a lot of brightness to it, so it changes the tones and the depths. Next is the Odin's Eye Norns palette, and I think last year when I ranked this one, I ranked it up higher, but this year I didn't use it as much. I wanted to rank everything that I tried, regardless of whether or not it was like new to me this year, so obviously there's a couple things in here that were not necessarily new to me this year, but I do really like this palette. I discovered this is sad. Discovered this is a multi-chrome shade, and I really, really like it. So I've been using that one, and then I love these metallics down here. They are so bright and poppin'. So definitely, you know, gave me some enjoyment. But all in all, the color story is still kind of disjointed for me. So there is something that lacks about it, which is why it's kind of at the bottom of the top, if you will. Next is the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2 palette, which looks like this. And this was a gift from my husband for Mother's Day. Oh my God, I can't even open it. Please open. There we go. Lord have mercy. So this is what this one looks like, and the metallics are what saved this palette entirely. These metallics are beautiful. They are sparkly. They have lots of dimension to them, so probably part of why they named the palette the way they did. I could really take or leave these two. I've tried to use them, and they don't work for how I do my makeup, so I kind of skip over them. And then the mattes are very pretty. They do have a nice gradient. There is another palette coming up that has a better gradient, I feel, of these types of mattes, but I cannot fault this palette for the shimmers. They are stunning. Next is the Bad Side Zodiac Air palette from Melt, and I love the packaging. Packaging is phenomenal. The color story is very nice, but again, it's kind of small. The shades are nice, but they're not as in-depth and like sparkly and multi-dimensional as I was hoping they would be. So it kind of fell towards the bottom of the top because of that reason, but I do think it's really nice. I would like to get the other ones on sale. I don't want to pay full price. And then I think this is the last of the Unique Beauty palettes. This is the Dark Souls palette, and it looks like this. This is an absolutely stunning color story. The only trouble is that these mattes, over here, these mattes do not show up very well. So you have to put on a white primer, and you have to really build a lot, dig a lot to get enough pigment on there to build it up. But I do think the metallics more than make up for it. Two beautiful metallic shades here, and then a duochrome here. So, and then the packaging is super, super cute. So it came up higher, obviously, because of all that. And then another teeny tiny palette in here. This is the Paris Etoile palette. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. And it looks like this, just a teeny tiny little palette. Again, you have a sparkly black, which I really like. These shades here definitely pull very gray. Like, they look distinctly blue and purple in the pan, but when you try to like blend them out over the eyes, they pull very gray. So that part was kind of disappointing because I was hoping they'd be a little bit more distinct, which is why this kind of floated towards the bottom of the top. And then here's the other half of the Melt palettes. Now, I thought this would go higher than where it did, but when I thought about this palette and how I used it and how much I used it compared to other palettes, this is really the most appropriate spot for it. It's a very pretty color story. It's very interesting. It's got a lot of depth, which I really like, but it doesn't have a lot of lightness, so I feel like it needs to be balanced by something else. And the metallics in here, while they're pretty, like you have this one and this one that are very pretty. This one is kind of like a throwaway shade. They just are not dimensional enough for me, so I find myself using this and then reaching into other things to really build like an incredible look. So that's why it kind of floated down to the bottom of the top. The top of the bottom of the top, if you will, because I only have 3 more palettes in this drawer. Next is the Give Me Glow Bad Witch Club palette, and this one definitely intrigued me. Like, shout out to this enormous mirror here, but I really like this color story. I think it's cool to have these like burgundies, purples, blues, peach green. They're all like really awesome Halloween shades. The duochrome quality of this shade is quite nice. These two definitely are just like straight up metallics, but again, they're good quality. They just don't have anything special. There's no like larger particle shimmer or anything in this palette to make it like more special. It's literally just like shiny burgundy, shiny green. So it kind of fell a little bit lower because of that, because I feel like they could have really like punched up those formulas a little bit. But in general, I like the color story, and this packaging is awesome. Next is the Secrets of the Fae palette, and this is from Unicorn Gang Shop, and it looks like this. There was an Indie Influencer Awards or Indie Awards or something that this won like 2 years ago. So no, a year? I guess a year ago. So I picked this one up like basically around Black Friday last year, and I was giving this one a try. I did really like this palette. I think it's a very beautiful color story. I like how varied it is, so it really forces you outside of your colors, like your comfort zone. There's not a lot of mattes to make like a cohesive monochromatic look in here, so I like that about this palette, and the packaging is very pretty. Last up in this set, and then we have 2 more drawers to go, is the Clarity Cosmetics Cobra palette. Now, I really liked this palette. I think it's very, very beautiful. My one shade is breaking a little bit, but I like the mattes. I think they make a nice gradient. These 2 mattes arguably are a bit similar, and the shimmer is the same thing, but I think it's a beautiful quad. I really liked using it. There are some other things that are a little bit similar that made it a little bit higher, but yeah, very pretty. Next is another teeny tiny little quad, and it is this ColourPop Wait and See quad. It kind of reminds me of the High Tide palette that I picked up last year, but this is like super, super pretty. You've got 2 mattes, 2 shimmers. It's really all you need, and it makes a beautiful look. It's like $10, so it made it up pretty high because it's just a stellar palette. Next, this is the Hip Dot and Girl Scouts Coconut Caramel palette, and number 1, it's scented. So if you know me and you know that that's my favorite Girl Scout cookie, I'm already halfway on board. I'm halfway sold. Then this color story I do really like. Now, these 2 shades are basically identical, so why we needed both, I don't know. I wish they would have made one a little bit deeper, one a little bit lighter, because they kind of have like a big jump between these 2 and then like no jump between these 2. So I wish they would have made that a little bit more evenly spaced in terms of depth. This shade I feel was incredibly unnecessary, so even if they didn't want to switch these 2 out, they could have put something there. And then I like having the gray and the black. Those are all very pretty, and I feel like this is a really nice complementary palette to some of my other like colorful metallic singles, because I tend not to do all matte palettes. I think I do them like all matte eye looks maybe 2 times a year. It's very, very infrequent. Next is the ColourPop Troublemaker palette. Again, like really cool packaging. The inside of this palette I do really like as well. I love that it's so cool toned and kind of grungy. This one also suffers, I think, from these metallics being pressed too hard, and so some of them don't have very good payoff. For example, this duochrome, while it looks very duochromatic in the pan, does not really work on the lid, but I do have some singles that I think work better, so I tend to just pull those in. But color story wise, I think this is an awesome color story. This shade here is a Super Shock, very metallic and beautiful, and then this shade here is a super, super intense silver, very much like those. Oh goodness, almost just threw this whole thing on the floor. Next is the Warrior palette from Sugar Drizzle. Now, I am not a huge fan of their packaging. Like, it just is very like immature to me, but this color story is, you cannot argue with this color story. It's very, very pretty. I love the duochromes that they picked out here. And then the mattes, you have the black, the green, and the yellow. Everything else is like a shimmer, metallic, duochrome, multichrome. So I feel like I could have used a blue as well, but again, then I would have had to sacrifice one of these like duochrome, multichrome shades, and I'm not sure I'd be willing to do that. So for what it is, I do really like it, but it's like, it's almost there, almost there. And next we have the Nomad Whistler Snow Lodge palette. This was like a banger. Honestly, I didn't think I was going to like this palette as much as I did, but I really liked this palette a lot. Again, I don't really care about this whole column right here, but everything else is beautiful. These like minty, sagey greens I thought were super pretty. I love the blues that they picked in here. Even this brown shade, there's something about it that I really, really like, which is odd for me. And then I love this like cranberry burgundy shade for the winter time. It's very sophisticated. I like this palette a lot. Next is the It's Belle Cool Summer Pressed Pigment palette. I did not pick this up when it originally launched because I just thought the price plus the shipping was too expensive, but then it went on like half price and I went ahead and picked it up, and then some people even managed to get this for like $10 plus shipping, so you guys were the best. You got the best deal, but I still thought my deal was pretty decent. The complaint that I have about this palette is the mattes. There's too many similar mattes, so like these 2 are super similar, these 2 are super similar, these 2 are super similar, so I feel like, I mean, I guess these, you could make the case that they're not quite as similar, and then there's not a lot of depth because all you really have is a dark green and a blue, neither of which really goes with these shades. So for me, I feel like it's missing something in the mattes, but the metallics save this palette. The metallics are so nice, they're so duochrome that I can kind of look past the mattes not being what I want them to be. Assuming I don't throw it on the floor. Which is a bit. Next is the Nomade Fête de Provence palette, and it looks like this. Now, the outside packaging of this one, I actually don't care for too much. Like, I see what they're trying to do, but this is just like not my artistic style, so that I could kind of pass on. But the inside of the palette is beautiful. These colors are definitely a little bit softer, but I love mixing up these grays and purples in here. I think that makes such a beautiful look. And again, these orangey kind of reddy shades I could skip over, but the pinks and the yellows are also very pretty. So it's very soft. It's kind of like that muted pastel type palette, but I think it's such an interesting color story that it gets a pass. And great quality, great quality. Next is the Glaminatrix Nocturnal palette, and when I picked mine up, one of the shades unfortunately arrived broken, so I had to like jam it all back in there, but the actual color story is very nice. I like the deep grunginess of this palette, and I feel like it complements my other palettes quite nicely. The metallics in here are definitely very pretty. Are they anything different from the duochrome formulas we see in other brands? Not necessarily, but it's a very, very beautiful palette, so I've really enjoyed this one. This is where it started getting hard, you guys, because like sorting it into like, I didn't really like it, I kind of like it, I love it, that was easy, but then sorting it beyond that was like, why did I do this to myself? Next is the Melt Gemini 2, and this is the one that I feel like had a little bit better range than the Major Dimension from Patrick Ta, the Major Dimension 2. Because I think these mattes just do a little bit better. They're a little bit punchier, and I think a little bit more pink toned, which I like. The Major Dimension I feel like is a little bit more brown toned, so I like that these pull a little bit more red. And I do really like these olivey green shades here. I think this makes really beautiful smoky eyeshadow looks, and I love that the only two metallics in this palette are very, very deep shades, so you really, you know, you're kind of forced to use them in a way that just makes everything smoky. So I super, super like that one. Coming in just above that though is the Lovelux Pretty Powerful palette. This is the first palette that I tried in 2022, and I picked this one up at Black Friday last year as well. I liked the packaging of this with like the hollow outside and then like the hollow paint splatters. I thought that was really cool. The inside has these really cool shades, and I'll see, does this want to focus? There we go. You can kind of see that like you can kind of see this shade here, and then this shade over here, and this shade over here have like this metallic-y multi-chrome flake type thing to it, and I think that's really pretty, but it seems to only be on the top, so the more you use this palette, the less of that you get, which is kind of disappointing, and I don't feel like it translates very well onto the eyes. I wish it translated better. I think it's a cool concept, but it's like just not quite there. Additionally, I don't think this palette was priced properly, because the original price for this palette was like $88 or something. It's over $80, which I thought was like a little bit wild. When I got this palette, it was half off, plus I used like an influencer code, so that brought it down to like $35-ish, which is much more reasonable. I just think the brand needs to kind of adjust their pricing a little bit. Next is the Odin's Eye Christmas Eve palette, and it looks like this beautiful, beautiful color story. Again, you've got these like icy frosty blues, you've got a really pretty multi-chrome right there. Sorry guys, I'm doing everything backwards in my viewfinder right now and it's not going well. I am too tired for that. The kind of grungy brownie pukey shades I like, but I haven't been able to use them yet, just to kind of round out everything. I've dipped into them, but I've not been like enthralled with what I did to them. The blues though, slam dunk, very, very beautiful, especially this one right here. So pretty. And then just above that is the Colored Rain Thunder palette, which is kind of funny because it's definitely lightning on the packaging. So I wish they would have called it like Thunder and Lightning, or not called it Thunder at all, because it doesn't really make sense. But this is the color story. These shimmers are very like glam light-esque. They have that beautiful smooth texture to them. The mattes are really buildable, and I love that. I love that you have some lighter shades here. And then you have these two grays that kind of allow you to blend out the edges, since obviously most people are not blue. And so I think it looks really nice. The looks that I put together with this, I have very much enjoyed. So it definitely rose pretty high. The packaging is super cool. So I could not possibly rank it like super low. Woo! Last in this kind of middle of the top category is the looooooong 2 palette from Odin's Eye, which looks like this. This is the color story. This shade right here has this really beautiful, like flaky pink to gold, very sparkly, shimmery type topper shade, which I really enjoy. I love that you have sort of your cool tones here. You have some warmer tones here, and I think they blend together really nicely. You can definitely make some really nice gradients in here, and then the metallics are just very nice and smooth, very buttery. So all in all, I really like this. The actual like tie-dye backdrop of this, I'm not a huge fan of, but I understand why they did it because it's basically a representation of the colors inside. But the sun and moon pictures that they have on here, I do really like. All right, let's get into the last part here. We've made it through 100 palettes already before my camera said, that is about enough, girl, shut up, and just died. So now I have a charged battery and I'm ready to finish out this ranking because we have 17 palettes to go. So coming in at number 17 is the ColourPop Aurora Struck palette. Now the packaging on this, 10 out of 10 out of 10. Very beautiful packaging. And the color story I love. It's very cool toned. It's very beautiful, almost ethereal. But again, some of these shimmers are packed super tight, and so you think they're going to have more of a duochrome than they do. I find myself building a look with this and then popping into my singles collection, my duochromes, my multichromes, just to kind of add a little extra pizzazz because I want things to be very dimensional, very interesting, and this kind of falls short on that. It's gorgeous, so it definitely made it to the top, but just not the very top. Next up is the Clarity Evil Mermaid palette, and this packaging is so cool. The like skulls made out of mermaid scales. I love that. And then the inside is very pretty. Now the thing that I think this suffers from is the mattes. These two are super similar. These two are super similar. So you end up really only having like 3 mattes to work with. And then this shade is very almost gritty in texture, so it's more challenging to work with. The other shimmers are very pretty. Overall, I love the color story. I love the packaging, but I just think they could have done a little bit to kind of get it to the next level. So that's why it's a little lower than some of these other palettes. Next is the Beauty Bay Neutral palette, and I'm shocked that this palette, I'll say in one respect, I'm shocked a neutral palette made it this high, but I'm not shocked that it was this one because this is a beautiful color story. These rows down here especially are my jam. These 2 rows up here I could kind of take or leave, but all the rest of this is definitely my vibe. Every look that I've done with this I've really liked. I got this as a gift from my mom and my stepdad for my birthday, and could not be happier. So this came in pretty high. Coming in at number 15 is the Glamlight and Scooby-Doo palette. This is the Retro Raggy palette, and I like this color story a lot. It definitely has those beautiful greens, kind of those limey, swampy greens, and then this periwinkle blue, and then I really like this duo right here. Very pretty, but I think the other half of this collection definitely was like a little bit more special, so it's even higher up in the ranking. But yeah, this made it up pretty high. Glamlight, they kill it. I really like their formula, so when they give me a color story I like, I am in love. And next we have Blend Bunny Surge palette, and this one I think was also in my ranking from last year, but not quite as high. Now this year I definitely dipped into it, I would say more. I was definitely using it to help add depth to some of my other palettes because I think some of those palettes definitely go like light to mid-tone and they just don't have the depth that I want. But this row right here in particular just gives me a lot of what I need, and then I do like adding pops of neon occasionally. So this one floated up towards the top, not a surprise. Coming in even higher than that is the Dollhouse palette, and this one is so pretty. It's so soft and like cool toned. It's like, it almost reminds me of like ballet kind of colors because it's just very soft, beautiful tones, especially like this row here. But then I love the depth that you can add with these shades here. The shimmers down here are so pretty, and these 2 in particular are some of my favorites in the palette, so I'm definitely looking forward to using this more next year. It's a very beautiful color story. All right, coming in at number 11 is the Glamlight Michaela palette. Now, this one I was definitely pretty impressed with. The color story is beautiful. I do feel like there's some redundancy here though, because like these shades and these shades are quite similar. These shades and these shades are quite similar. So did you necessarily need all 3 of these steps, or could you gotten away with like 2 steps? I think you could have done okay with 2 steps, but it's whatever. The metallics in here are beautiful. I love these really grungy metallics here, especially this like dark blue here is very, very vibrant on the lids. And I like this one a lot too. It's like a blue to almost purpley duochrome. It's very pretty. So overall, I really like it. I think it's a little bigger than what it needed to be, but very, very nice quality. And I like the bonus maracas. All right. Coming in at number 10 is the Man I Love Frogs palette, or the MILF palette, if you will, from Sugar Drizzle. This is the palette from them that I feel like is way more what I wanted than that Haunted Gnome Chrome palette. This is like 100% my vibe. Greens, blues, purples, that's all me. It's a very beautiful color story. It does get that like oil leaking around it, but I don't care. I care zero about that. The brand actually sold these at a discounted rate because they were starting to do that before they even sold the palettes. And I picked up one of those discounted ones because I knew it was going to do that anyway. So I really didn't care that it had already started. And clearly it's progressed a lot more since when I first got it. But again, I don't care. These shades are beautiful. Coming in at number 9, right? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, yes, is the Star Wars Darth Vader palette. And if you've seen my other videos, my other rankings, you've probably guessed that this palette was going to come up pretty high. It's got a beautiful Super Shock. You've got some really nice depth here. The only shade I really don't use a whole lot is this red shade, but I think everything else more than makes up for it. It's very similar in color story to the Melt Mary Jane palette, but it doesn't have that same irritation for my lids. So I really, really like this one. And then just above that is the Huda Wild Jaguar palette, and it looks like this. Very beautiful little 9-pan color story. Super similar, but instead of the pop of red, they went with like a pop of like lavender, which I think is also very complementary to these other tones. This kind of like grungy shade borderlines on like olivey brown, which I really like. And I think the neutrals that they picked out here have the appropriate variation in depth to make this a cohesive, complete look in one palette. So definitely really like that one, and it's a great quality. All right, coming in at number 7 is the Serenity palette from Cosmic Brushes. Now, I thought this was going to be like my number 1 palette, honestly, until I started looking at everything else together, and then I was like, yeah, I don't think I can make this my number 1 palette, but this is a beautiful color story. You've got those swampy greens, the blues, you've got these 2 little pops here, you've got this kind of periwinkle shade. The only tones that I really don't feel are necessary in here are these 2 shades here. This like orange, peach orange, and brown, I think were completely unnecessary. I wish they would have done something that kind of went a little bit more with the rest of the palette, but it's not my palette, so it slipped down a little bit because of that. But overall, like, the packaging is very beautiful, like simple and beautiful, and the color story is very high quality. Coming in at number 6 is the Glam Shop palette, the Laguna palette, and this one had some broken shades. I actually ordered this for myself and my aunt, and when it came, both of us had lost this orange shade here, so I'm not sure what the formula issue was there, but the rest of this palette is stunning. This shade here has this really beautiful frosty lime green iridescence to it, which I very much appreciate, and I love the like swampy depth of this particular shade here. I think this could have been just a smidge deeper, and this could have been a smidge bluer, but overall I still think this is a really nice color story, and it rose up very high because it's a great color story, great quality, and I really like the looks I did with it. Coming in at number 5. Now, I thought this palette was going to be high, but I didn't think it was going to be number 5 high, honestly. And that is the Cara Beauty. This is the third of that trio of palettes. This is Dare to Be Shocking. and it looks like this. So definitely I was shocked at how high this one came up, but I think it's a beautiful color story. You have really great textures, got a couple pops of like lime in here, but it's otherwise very cool toned, very blue. I love these kind of like denim-y blues here. You have a really nice black in here, some kind of gunmetal-y, kind of grapey metallic shades. This is a beautiful, very cohesive color story. I feel like it goes from very light to very dark, and you can do a lot of different things with this look. You aren't kind of cornered by one particular color story or one particular like pattern of your eye looks. So I really, really like this one, especially for the price point. I found this one again, $7.99 at TJ Maxx. So if you can find these palettes, like by all means, highly recommend this one, even if you don't pick up the other two. Coming in at number 4 is the other half of the Scooby-Doo collection. This is the Creeps and Crawls palette, and this one just took my breath away. Let me tell you, it took my breath away. This is a beautiful color story. These types of like deep, murky purples, blues, greens, like this is my jam. I love the depth of all the metallics that are in here. I do not think that this necessarily gives me a cohesive color story, because unless I use this kind of lighter purple, I don't have a lot of like blending out like above the crease kind of shades. But I definitely do not mind reaching into some of these other palettes to make this palette work, because it is so pretty. The aesthetics of it, the look of it, I love everything. The collab is like my 100% favorite nostalgia from my childhood, so it rose really high for that reason. All right, coming in at number 3, this is the last of the Glam Light palettes, and this is the Barbie palette. Now I played with Barbies a ton, but that's not something that I wanted to like relive as an adult. So the nostalgia part of this one like didn't necessarily get me, but this color story just sung to me. Now again, I could really take or leave these kind of like murky yellowy shades over here, but this purple, blue, pink color story, this is gonna get me every single time, and the Glam Light formula does not disappoint. Now I will say, these pans are kind of shallow. I don't know if this is less product than what they normally do. Let me see, what does it say here? Net weight is 1 ounce. There's really 1 ounce of product in here, so that means all of these are like super, super small. The Creeps and Crawls, do I have a net weight on this one? No. Is that legal? I thought you had to put a net weight on stuff. Oh, I'm sorry, it's on the front. 15 grams. So let me see. This is 10 shades. So basically these 2 rows here, minus like 2 on the end, are the same weight as what's in the Scooby-Doo palette. So these are filled less, a lot less than what the Scooby-Doo ones are. And you can tell because when I went to use this for the first time, I stuck my finger in it to wipe it all over the lid, and I hit pan. And I was like, I have never hit pan in a palette in my entire damn existence of having makeup. Even before I had a huge collection, I never hit pan. So that was like, what? And I kind of like mushed it back together because I don't really like to see pans in my palettes necessarily. Like that's not what I'm going for. But now it looks like somebody's dog like chewed on this shade. Regardless, it's a super pretty color story. The colors in here blend beautifully together. I love the gradation of it. I like the packaging of it. Again, I'm not like a super like Barbie fanatic to like relive that, but my kids are really into Barbies right now. So when they see this, they're like, Mommy, you have a Barbie palette. And it makes them super excited, which I think is cute. So this one made it all the way up to number 3. Coming in at number 2, it would not be a palette ranking of mine without having a collab palette, making it up way higher than I thought it would. And it's the Odin's Eye and Angelic Nymphes Gila palette. And it looks like this. Oh, super pretty. I used this for like a week and a half straight. I would not use anything else. I just kept digging into it and digging into it. This shade down here is this very beautiful like eggplant blue duochrome, and then I love the sparkly black that's in here. The multi-chrome that's in here is also quite nice, and then I do think the pinks and greens are very complementary. It's very similar to that Cara Beauty palette, but I do think the finishes in this one are just like an extra, like Odin's Eye just has great finishes, so it's just like an extra cut above, and it comes with a multi-chrome, which the other palette does not. So that's why this one made it up so much higher. Plus this packaging, like as a person who works in medicine, I was like hella nerded out by this packaging and I loved it. And then coming in at number 1, oh my god, you guys, I need to go I need to go lay down after this. But coming in at number 1 is the Bella Beauté Bar Strange and Unusual palette. I really liked this palette. Like, I was hyped for this palette when I first got it. I ordered it on launch day. It was super expensive and I was like, I don't care. I want it. It looks so pretty and I could not be happier. All of the multi-chromes in here are gorgeous. This shade Tombstone is like a really beautiful like purple, but then it has this like gold purple multi-chrome shimmer in it. The black has a beautiful blue shimmer to it. These shades up here, I'm kind of so-so about, but everything else more than makes up for that. I have loved using this. I used it in so many different ways. I've taken it traveling. I feel like there's a lot of variety of looks in this palette, and it was just my favorite palette of the year. So with that said, finally, that is everything for this video. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you go, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye!